Hey there, I'm Mac,
And I'm Jenny.
and together with our dog Disco, we spent 3 months cruising Southeast Alaska aboard our 37-foot sailboat Maya. In this video, we're going to be discussing several topics regarding that cruise, namely the route, trip costs, navigational hazards, weather and climate considerations, helpful gear to bring. We'll go over our fishing setup, and then lastly, we're going to talk about kind of our ideal Alaskan cruising boat.
So this video is meant to be a bookend to a 12-part video series that we have of that Alaskan cruise. So if you missed that, there's a link above or down in the description. And we also have chapters set up, so if you want to jump to a specific topic, you can use that.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. First, let's look at our route. So during our trip, we traveled 2,500 miles over 87 days. We left Anacortes, Washington on April 13th. We took the standard Marine Highway route, which is the most direct and protected route all the way to Ketchikan. The U.S.-Canadian border was closed due to COVID during our transit, so we were allowed to pass through and anchor along the way, but we weren't allowed to go to shore. So we basically just hustled through. After catching our breath in Ketchikan, we then explored Misty Fjords National Monument, which was really amazing. The landscapes were unbelievable, and we saw grizzly bears, so that was awesome. After our tour through Misty Fjords, we traveled north through the interior islands, stopping at Myerschuck, Wrangell, and Petersburg. Myerschuck was basically just a collection of houses with a small dock, but Wrangell and Petersburg are developed towns with airports and services.
So from Petersburg, we attempted to see the LeConte Glacier, but ice deterred us from seeing the face of the glacier. So from there, we moved northwest to Baranof Island. We hit a bunch of different anchorages on Baranof, as well as spent a considerable amount of time in the Sitka area. We had family fly in for a week of fishing, which was really fun. Air travel to Sitka was super easy, as Alaska Airlines has a bunch of flights out of Seattle. After our stay in Sitka, we headed south along Baranof Island's west coast, which was incredibly scenic and remote and home to one of our favorite anchorages. From Baranof Island, we continued southward towards the small town of Craig, anchoring at several western islands along the way.
The last week in Alaska, we spent fishing the area outside of Craig before making a 6-day nonstop passage back to Nia Bay, Washington. From Nia Bay, we traveled through the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the San Juan Islands before landing back in Anacortes on July 8th. Okay, so a couple comments about our route. You'll notice that we missed a whole bunch of Southeast Alaska. We didn't see Tracy Arm or Ford's Terror. We missed Juneau, and we didn't make it to Glacier Bay. Unfortunately, 3 months is just not enough time to do Southeast Alaska justice.
Ideally, you'd want about 5 months, leaving as early as you can in the spring and then being back south by early September. An even better scenario would be bringing the boat north in the spring, spending that whole summer cruising Southeast Alaska, leaving the boat somewhere there in the winter, and then returning again the next spring to spend a whole nother summer cruising Southeast Alaska before then bringing the boat south in early September. That way you only have to do the 650-mile slog through the Inside Passage once per season. Okay, so aside from not having enough time, we really enjoyed our route. Misty Fjords was incredibly scenic, the towns were fun to explore, and we got to see and experience truly breathtaking scenery and wildlife. No regrets at all on our route, just wish we had more time.
Okay, so let's jump to the next topic, which I'm sure you'll find interesting, and that is, how much does it cost to cruise in Alaska? During our 3-month cruise, we spent a grand total of $5,450, and here's a breakdown of those costs.
You'll notice food was the majority of our expenses. We did a huge $1,000 provisioning run before we left Washington, mostly staples and whatnot, but we also did resupply on food while in Alaska. Food is somewhat expensive in Alaska. Pretty much everything is brought up via barge, so prices really reflect all that travel.
So our next biggest category we spent money on was diesel. We spent a total of $723 on 224 gallons of diesel. Now, Maya is a sailboat, but just before we left on this trip, we discovered our forestay was broken. So that forced us to motor the entire way from Anacortes to Sitka. So if you have a sailboat, you can probably, bring those numbers down a little bit in terms of fuel costs.
The third biggest category we spent money on was moorage. We spent a total of 21 nights tied to a dock. Here's a breakdown of where we paid for moorage. We've included all the places we had to pay for moorage, even though some were just docks and not proper marinas. The average cost worked out to be about $33 per night.
So the fourth biggest category we spent money on was boat parts and maintenance. We spent a total of $693 on that category, most of which was a new propane tank that costs about $300. We also had to get a new bilge pump and then, filters and whatnot for the engine, along with some other little ancillary things. So that price or that cost is going to be different for every boat, but that was our experience.
The next category was fishing. We spent a total of $617 on fishing supplies. That includes $400 in fishing licenses for the both of us. We also picked up some new fishing gear as well as bait. While the licenses were a little expensive, it was worth it for the amazing fishing opportunities Alaska affords. The next category was dining out. We spent a total of $297 in that category. We don't dine out much, but we typically try to dine out at least once in each of the towns that we stop at. Sitka and Ketchikan had the most dining options, while Wrangell and Petersburg, I feel, were somewhat limited on restaurant options.
Okay, the next category is communications. So we brought a Garmin InReach with us, which cost us $50 a month. It's got satellite, text communications, as well as tracking, and it has an SOS feature in case there was an emergency. We didn't include our cell phone bills on this trip, but we did bring an AT&T phone and a Verizon phone with us, and far and away, AT&T was better coverage. So I can't speak about other carriers, but that was our experience.
Okay, so we're getting to the smaller categories, so we'll go ahead and just rattle those off. We spent $125 on souvenirs. There was lots of good shopping in Ketchikan. We spent $100 on alcohol purchases in Alaska. Booze is very expensive in Alaska, so be sure to pack a bunch before you head north. The next category was laundry and showers, which we spent $57 on. And lastly, we spent $75 on propane and fuel for our heater. So there's our look at our financials for a 3-month cruise. The total comes out to $30 per person per day. You can really stretch your dollar if you plan ahead on food and anchor out a lot.
While the Inside Passage allows for a protected route up to Alaska, it's not without its challenges. If you're coming up from the south, you'll definitely encounter places where rapids form. Places like Dodd Narrows and Seymour Narrows need to be timed correctly according to the tides to safely transit them.
Although by showing up on time, you're almost always guaranteed a safe passage through. The next two major hurdles for us were Queen Charlotte Strait and the Dixon Entrance. Both of these bodies of water have serious reputations and can get nasty. We ended up spending 3 days waiting for a weather window at Queen Charlotte Strait, and then another 2 days waiting for a weather window at the Dixon Entrance. So be sure to be mindful of the weather before attempting to cross those, and don't be in a hurry.
Another navigational challenge is the presence of logs in the water. So we passed thousands of logs during our trip, and we were always scanning the water for them. We have a protected prop and a full keel, which is generally considered pretty safe for log strikes, but even though we were still always on high alert for logs. So boats with exposed prop and rudders will want to be very conscious of the logs.
So what is the climate like in Southeast Alaska? We spent May and June in Southeast Alaska, and for the most part, the weather was cloudy and overcast and temperatures in the mid-50s. On those rare sunny days, it was absolutely gorgeous, but most of the time it was cloudy and overcast. We experienced a lot of rain as well, so you'll definitely want to bring good foul weather gear as well as a good heater. We have a solid fuel heater, which we used a lot on this trip, but next time we would opt for a diesel heater. While it was really nice to have a crackling fire on the boat, it was kind of a pain to keep feeding the fire, plus the compressed wood we used for fuel took up a lot of space. In any case, it's really nice to have a heater to take the chill and the dampness out of the air, especially on those rainy, overcast days.
What things should you bring on the boat? For our cruise, we used Exploring Southeast Alaska by Douglas. We also used Ports and Passes for tide information, and we relied heavily on Navionics on our cell phone, both for anchorage suggestions and for tide and current information. We also enjoyed having the book Names on the Chart aboard. It tells how all the islands in Southeast Alaska got their names, and it's a really fun reference that gives credence to Southeast Alaska's rich history. Okay, moving on to gear recommendations. First and foremost, we recommend Extra Tough boots. They're the perfect footwear for a trip like this. We basically lived in these boots during our time in Alaska and would not have survived without them, especially with all the dog missions to shore. So you're definitely going to want to pick yourself up a pair before you go.
Along those same lines, we loved our Helly Hansen bibs. We pretty much lived in those during the entire trip. They're great for rain and wind protection.
Our next recommendation is having a nice set of binoculars on board. We were constantly using our binoculars, whether it was to get a closer look at wildlife or scanning in front of the boat for logs. We can't recommend binoculars enough, and we have a pair of Steiner Mariners, and we absolutely love them. We'll leave a link for them below.
What was your fishing setup? We did a lot of fishing in Southeast Alaska. We caught everything from halibut to salmon, lingcod, black rockfish, prawn, crab, you name it. First, we'll go over our prawn and crab setups. We carried 2 crab traps aboard Maya, and typically we would drop the traps as we were entering the anchorage, let them soak overnight, and then we'd pick them back up as we were leaving the anchorage the next day. We had okay success with crabbing. I think we were a bit early for Dungeness crab. We have heard that the crabbing gets a lot better later in the summer. For prawns, we carried 1 trap with roughly 350 feet of line. We picked up prawn bait in Ketchikan. It seems to be available virtually everywhere. And same thing as the crab traps, we would drop the trap as we were entering the anchorage and then retrieve it the next day as we were leaving. A quick note about both prawn and crab traps. Make sure to check the regulations before you go and make sure your traps are up to spec with the regulations. We have heard of people getting tickets who used traps in Washington that weren't the same regulations as in Alaska. So be sure to check that before you go.
So moving on to our fishing setup. For trolling, we use a 9.5 foot Okuma rod with a Okuma CW203D reel using 30-pound monofilament. We use a Les Davis Deep 6 diving planer with a flasher and a spoon typically. We also found success using frozen herring, which is widely available in Alaska. I'd also recommend brining the herring if you have the ability. Also for trolling, we used an X-Rap Rapala Magnum lure. We affectionately call this thing Big Nasty, and we picked up a bunch of fish using this lure. So we definitely recommend this one.
For jigging and bottom fishing, we have a 6.5 foot ugly stick with a Penn Squall 20 LW reel using 40-pound braided line. Again, we had really good success using herring suspended on a spreader bar. So that's a super quick look at our fishing setup. There's tons of tackle and fishing supplies up in Southeast Alaska, so don't be afraid to leave home before you have all your gear.
What is your ideal Southeast Alaska cruising boat? I think the best feature you can have for a cruising boat in Southeast Alaska is a pilot house or some sort of enclosed cockpit. It's inevitable that you're going to be traveling during nasty weather, and we took the full brunt of it with Maya's open cockpit. So having a warm, dry place to pilot the boat from would be really, really nice. Another nice feature for Southeast Alaska is having a boat with a bunch of windows. Unfortunately, with Maya, we can't see outside while we were sitting down below deck, and I know we missed out on wildlife because of that. So having a boat where you can be really comfortable inside, but also be looking out on shore is a really nice feature to have. For those reasons, I think like a 35 to 40 foot trawler would be a really nice boat for cruising Southeast Alaska. I really like the Katie Krogan 42. It's got a fly bridge, it's got a nice covered aft area, lots of windows, a great back deck, and yeah, I just think it'd be a really nice boat to cruise Southeast Alaska on.
Personally, I think a sailboat with a pilot house would be great. Something like a Naughty Cat or something similar to that. You have a nice warm place to drive the boat from, still have the ability to sail when the wind pipes up, and then you have that nice viewing area with all the windows to watch the wildlife. Now, as far as dinghies go, our Portland Pudgy was really well suited for Southeast Alaska. We were constantly going to shore for dog missions, and being able to drag our dinghy up and over barnacle-covered rocks is key. You would have to be really careful with an inflatable dinghy with all the barnacles and sharp rocks. Okay, so that's a super brief look at our Alaska adventure. If you have any questions or comments, just leave those below.
We also offer consulting sessions if you have more in-depth questions or need assistance planning your trip to Southeast Alaska. You can reach out to us via the comments below or at our website at cruisingmaya.com.
We also have links to all the items that we mentioned in this video down in the description below. If you purchase items from those links, we get a small commission, so it's basically a win-win scenario. You get great gear, and you're also helping out our channel.
At no additional cost to you. So before we go, just a reminder, we have a 12-part, 2.5-hour video series covering the trip we just talked about here. So there's a link above in case you missed that. Okay, so that's going to do it. We hope you found this video helpful. Southeast Alaska is truly a wild place, and exploring it by boat is the best way to experience this amazing place.
Thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you here next time.
Cheers. Also, we really enjoyed having the book Names on the Chart aboard. Names on a Chart. Also, we really enjoyed having the book. It tells basically how all the islands got their names, and it's a really fun reference, and it gives credence to Southeast. It basically gives. Oh my god, I don't know why this is so hard. It tells how all the islands in Southeast Alaska. We enjoyed having the book names on the chart. It tells how all the islands in Southeast Alaska got their names, and it's a really fun reference that gives credence to Southeast Alaska's rich history.
Yay!